Welcome back, everyone, to the Fantasy Football Profit Podcast. Today, we're talking auction draft like we always do, but this one is going to be our 3 tips to dominate your auction draft this year in 2024. I think these 3 that we're going to talk about are really, this is how you win. Like, it's basic, but these are very basic things that you need to master to win. And I think it's something we've been doing for a while. So let's jump into number 1. Which is, I think, how you prepare for the draft. I think that, honestly, I don't know. It gets talked about some, but I think this is for auction is just such a key in its tier rankings. And the difference with why you need tier rankings in an auction is just because in a snake, if you rank your running backs, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. You get the guy who's first, right? You get that guy. Auction's different because you're bidding on players, and they're not going to go for the same price. You need to know who's in a tier, how many people are left in a tier, because the prices will fluctuate in that tier. And I think we talked about this last year as we prepared for, the season. One of the biggest things about the tiers, you could say you have 3 running backs in a tier. Whoever goes third is going to go for the most money. It's almost like every time. It doesn't matter if that player is considered worse than maybe the top guy in that tier. He's going to go for more money. It's just the way it works. So you have to know how many players are left in that tier, who's there, and who you're willing to kind of get in the same spot, kind of a thing. Tier rankings to me are just absolutely essential.
Absolutely. And the big one with that as well is you want to customize them to your liking.
Yeah.
You can just grab them online and just take someone else's. That's okay. Yep. That's fine. But I'll give you an example. I think the big one is when I'm looking at a tier, I don't really have one guy out of that tier. Maybe I like him a little more, but you're going for that tier. You're not really going for the one guy. If you're going for one guy, he should be in his own tier.
He's the tier above them. Yes.
And I think that, and we talked about this right before we started recording, but we were talking about tiers. And for example, Fantasy Pros this year in 2024 has the top tier of running back as Christian McCaffrey, Bijan, and Breece Hall.
So that's their top tier?
That's their top tier.
Well,
those 3 guys, but we already talked about this. We think McCaffrey is on a tier on his own.
100%.
So it changes the way we would go about going after those players.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. That's exactly how you look at it. Like you said, if you think a guy's better, way better than somebody else that you have in the tier, then he's not in the same tier. Like, get guys that you're willing to, that you're like, okay, they're interchangeable. Like, you can have multiple tiers then. Like, that's why you make your own. And as the draft's going, I always am looking at that and be like, all right, this is who's left. This guy's going to go for a lot. And then, sometimes you might have to spend a little more to get the final guy in the tier. I don't love to do that, but sometimes you just need to. Sometimes you have to do it. But that's knowing who's left in that. And
I think this is a perfect segue into rule number 2, because you don't want to be caught.
Yes. So that's what happens. So why rule number 2 is important. It's attack early. Don't wait till the end of that tier. That's basically what happens. Because if you attack early, especially within the tiers, you're going to get guys for probably a better price than at the end. And you start building your team. That's what I like to do, is get a couple guys early so I kind of know where I'm at already. All right, I came in, I had a strategy. I got, I don't know, McCaffrey, whatever, whoever, wide receiver you get, doesn't matter. But then you know how much you have left, where you got to build, where you got to get value at. It's just the way to do it. This has happened before in the early days of doing auctions. 15 years ago almost now at this point, Jeff. It's been a while. I remember waiting, and I looked back at one of them. I got like the 31st guy in a draft. That was my first guy. I was like, geez, that's not good. Yeah, you know what? There's 30 probably good players that I'm not getting elite players anymore. And I don't think you win fantasy without elite players. You need the best of the best. You really do. It's a mixture, right? But you need some really good guys to win. So attack early and get those guys. Don't sit on the sidelines. People that aren't confident in it, that maybe are new to it, haven't done enough mocks, they sit around and wait, and prices seem to be too high for them, I think. And they're like, I'll wait. And then you realize, oh wait, there's nobody left.
Yeah. And I'm okay. Like if your plan is to have, hey, I really want to spread my money out, and I'm thinking I can get a bunch of guys all in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, all of my starters are going to be in there. If that is your plan, I'm okay with it. But if you end up with a bunch of low tier guys, like all in tier 3, tier 4, and you're overpaying for them because there's no one left, that is where you don't want to be. And yeah, you could be, you know, one guy might say, I'm just going to overspend on Christian McCaffrey and Josh Allen, right? And say, I'll fill in the rest. That changes your entire strategy. So if you don't attack early, you don't know that stuff. And if you're waiting, especially for a guy that doesn't get nominated early, if you're saying I'm married to one guy, you better be willing to put in the money because it will dictate your entire strategy.
Talk about nominating players. Like that's where if I don't yet have players on my team, the way I'm going to nominate is going to be do attack early. I'm going to nominate guys I actually want because if you're not nominating the guys you actually want early and you don't have a team built yet, you might just be waiting for that guy. And then what if you don't get him? What if it goes wrong? What if it goes for way too much? And then what do you do? Yeah. So nominate your guys you actually want early. It's not always what I did in the past. It's not always what maybe people tell you, throw out a defense, throw out a guy you don't want. I don't want to throw out a guy I want. I want to attack early, get my guy, know what my team is and know how to build it.
100%. And I think that is the biggest one. And I could do some cutesy stuff back in the day where you're just like, well, I'm going to get the best defense for a buck because everyone's too worried. I've really gotten away from anything like that. Back when we used to play with kickers too, it'd be something like that. Throw out a kicker for a buck that's high end because no one wants to pay for him. But I don't like the strategy of throwing out unless you absolutely know you're going to go like, I'm going to go 0 RB or whatever. I'm not going to go for McCaffrey if you want to get that money off the board.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But my big thing is, what if McCaffrey went for a lot less than you thought?
Exactly.
But also, I wouldn't throw him out because I know someone else is going to want him. He's a very highly touted guy. But like, if I really want CeeDee Lamb, and I'm like, if I can get him for, say, whatever it would be, $55 or less, I'm absolutely going to do it. I'm going to build my team around it. Find out right away. Throw him out there because otherwise other wide receivers are going to go and you won't know whether or not you have money for them.
I think it goes into our third tip, our final tip, which is prepare to pivot. Because like you said, like what if they go for lower price? Like that's the thing. You might not have come into that draft. Maybe you don't go for it. You're not going to be, I'm not going to spend money on Christian McCaffrey. He goes for way too much. What if you get into that draft and Christian McCaffrey went for $15, $20 less than you thought? Like you thought someone's going to go on a $200 budget. You think, oh, my league's he's going to go $80. What if all of a sudden he's $60? He's sitting there and you're like, shoot, let me bid on him. I would say do that. Don't be like, I have my strategy. This is what I have. If you think that's the value and you think that's going to help your team win, go do it. But part of that preparing to pivot means you probably should do some mocks. You probably should do some different strategies. You probably should build out your team a little bit. One thing we'll have actually in the description here is this little, it's a simple little team builder, auction team builder that I came up with where you can actually plug in players and it will load the pricing from ESPN and Yahoo and Fantasy Pros. I have it all in there. So figure out what you can do. Then you can actually have a spot where you can put your own players in too. But do those things, do those mocks, figure out different teams. Don't just have exactly one. Maybe have your one main. Like this is what I think I want. This is my ideal. But make some different adjustments based on, what if things go differently? What if I get value somewhere I didn't expect to?
Oh, without a doubt. And I love having 5 different teams and also I play with it and then I eventually come to one that I really, really love.
Yep.
And a lot of times it'll be, okay, well, you can figure out with the building blocks. So like I want to spread it out, but hey, if I got McCaffrey, do I really mind losing out on, whatever, Mixon later on? No, I don't mind at all if I can get him for this price. The big thing for me too is the biggest advantage of auction, and it goes into preparing to pivot, is the fact that you can bid on every single player.
Yeah.
Like early on when you have money, you can be in the bidding for every single player. So go ahead and do that. You can, if you really, really don't want a player, that's totally fine. Like I have players where I'm like, it's not worth the money. But until we get to, 75% of their perceived value, like I'm in there. You're getting the feel for it. And that way you won't be as nervous. That is the biggest advantage. I can go after a million different $1 players if I want. I can go after 2 really big names. Go out there and kind of force the point. You'll put the pressure on everyone else.
This will be for future episodes, but I like you saying that about getting in on the bidding and all that, because I think if you're there the whole time, if you just aren't doing anything and all of a sudden you just pop up on a player, everyone's be like, oh, Jeff wants that guy.
That's actually such a good point because they're like, oh, no. And that is such a good point.
Yeah. So just kind of be there, but get to a point where you're like, all right, if I get this guy, maybe he wasn't on my top list, but if I get him for this value, that's great. Do to that point and then back off.
Yeah.
But if you're always around, like that's, otherwise people just all of a sudden jump in. We do that in our leagues. We can see when all of a sudden someone comes in, we're like, oh, of course he wants that guy.
And they get quiet.
And then you might bid him up a little bit. Be a little cautious with that. Be cautious with bidding up. But in general, those are the things. It's get those tier rankings. That's the biggest thing. To me, that's like the most important thing in auction is know who's in these tiers. And especially when at the beginning of the drafts, that's what matters. And then, I think you're not going to miss out on guys. You're going to know that, there's nobody left here. You need to go now because otherwise it's not going to happen. Attack early, get your team building early on. You'll be in much better shape. And then, you know what? Prepare to pivot if it doesn't go exactly like you think it will, because it'll never go exactly like you think it will.
No. And we're talking very, very high end when we're talking about like, if I miss out on Christian McCaffrey. Yeah. But even when you have your building blocks and say you have half your team, there will be a guy later on where you're kind of like, okay, if I get no one else, is he worth throwing my last $15 on? You kind of have to know that. And that changes how you're going to do the rest of the draft, where you're like, okay, now everyone's a buck.
Yep.
Like every little bit of that counts. And that's the fun part of it.
And there's more tips, there's more tricks. We'll get into those as we get closer to the season, but I think these are your 3 keys to really prepare yourself to have a good season and a good draft, because it's nothing better than an auction draft. So be prepared for it. But all right, that'll do it for this one. Talk to you guys next time.